So, welcome to today's Key Company webinar about Analyst Relations Risk Management. I'm speaking today with Stacey, Alexander, and Richard East. I'm going to introduce them in a little moment, and then I'm sure a few other people will be joining the webinar as we move ahead. Just to start off with a bit of context, though. We're going to introduce ourselves and then reassure you about the amount of time that we're going to be taking. While I run through that, I'll just ask the other folk on the call to mute themselves if they are not speaking, so that then we'll have less background noise in the background. So I'm Duncan Chapple. I'm one of the managing partners here at Key Company. And I'm particularly here as the director of the Analyst Value Survey. So today we're going to be sharing with you some of the information from the survey, which is giving us a better insight into some of the risks that are present now for analyst relations professionals. And I'm going to be talking through that data and taking the place in today's webinar of Steve Loudermilk. So Steve is a colleague of mine here at Key Company. He's one of the advisory partners that we have in our practice in North America, but because of things happening in the family, he can't be here today. I'm joined by two people with longer and in many ways deeper experience in the analyst relations community than I have. Richard East, who for the last couple of years has been running Active Influence, a consultancy to analyst relations managers, but is probably better known for many years of service at IBM, and Stacey Alexander, who has an even longer and more varied background. I'm just going to ask each of the colleagues to introduce themselves and maybe even say something about what they think about this topic, what they hope that we might touch on when we're developing the conversation today. Richard, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Duncan, and welcome everybody to today's call. As Duncan has said, I've been running my own analyst relations consultancy and influencer marketing consultancy for a few years called Active Influence. And before that, I used to work for IBM in analyst relations latterly, but I've also worked in product development, programming, product marketing, running market intelligence and market research functions, as well as being a marketing manager. So that's helped me a lot, certainly in my latter roles with analyst relations, to get a broad view and perspective of things. I think there's a lot of interesting information into today's presentation that Duncan will be giving, and hopefully you'll get a lot of value out of it, and certainly if there's anything that you guys need to follow up on, I'm sure Duncan or myself will be really happy to do that. But yes, I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Richard. I think one of the fascinating things about you and many other people who've had a career in IBM is that even though you've been in one firm, you've had so many different jobs and so many different experiences. Our companion on the call is Stacey Alexander. Stacey, welcome. Would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Duncan, and thanks everyone. I am thrilled to be on this call because I think this is a very important area in analyst relations, and I come at it from more of a sales perspective. I was sitting at a four-man startup in Boulder, Colorado in 2000, and the next thing I knew, an analyst from Gartner had recommended our company to a very large company that shall remain nameless to protect the innocent or guilty, but it was a very fascinating education for me, and that brought me to SageCircle, which was a company that really taught me about analyst relations and was really the innovator in CRM around analyst relations. What they were doing back in 2003, 4, and 5 was amazing, and now I am very happy to be working with Duncan. I've followed him on his different mediums, especially LinkedIn, for years, and I've learned much from him, and I've been working with him this year, and it's fun to be back in this realm. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Stacey. Obviously, one of the wonderful things about your background at SageCircle is that when Dave Eckert retired as CEO at SageCircle, SageCircle came into Peer Company. And so it's lovely to have this kind of double closing of loops, you know, to have you and the SageCircle brand both inside our company after such a long time.
It's fun. I say all roads lead back to SageCircle.
It certainly seems to be true. So our goal today is to end within 45 minutes and certainly to get most of the information delivered in the next 25 or so minutes. What I'm going to do is work through some of the slides that we've been developing, looking at the analyst relations, the insight for analyst relations managers available in the Analyst Value Survey. But I think the framework that we're picking up and playing with for this webinar is that of risk management. And when we talk about risk management, what we're really talking about is a kind of multiplication. On the one hand, you've got various risks. Firstly, we're measuring the impact of those risks. You know, what would it be like for us if these things happened? And then secondly, we're looking at their likelihood. How likely are these things to unfold inside our company or unfold inside our market? And from an analyst relations point of view, it's so important that people keep their eyes and ears open, that they're evaluating the market, and that they're understanding what are the risks that could have an impact on the way in which we're working. What should we prioritize as analyst relations people, for example? What are the risks that seem to be both most impactful and most likely? And then what policies and strategies are needed for us to be able to move forward? And what we'll be doing is picking up in three particular dimensions, ways in which the Analyst Value Survey has shown us some specific risks that we think people need to be careful about. To start off, I think many people on the call will be familiar with what the Analyst Value Survey is. I started running the survey in 2001, and each year it's been the only longitudinal study available to explain how people on the buy side and on the demand side, how people on the supply side and on the demand side are differently using analysts, which analyst firms are rising in profile, what they're using them for, and that insight to be able to get hundreds, maybe thousands each year of people who are really using these firms gives us a lot of insight as analyst relations professionals into which firms are being influential and what sorts of decisions people are using analysts to get more insight. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to be picking up on three particular risks. Firstly, there's a dislocation. So vendors are investing their time and money into one set of analyst firms, and buyers are using some but not all of those. Secondly, there are new influences. Firstly, there are new firms, some of which we won't be familiar with, which are appearing as analyst firms, and that's pretty normal. But also there are large firms like the big accounting firms, which are developing their business advisory services and are looking more and more like analyst firms when they go into the market. And then thirdly, there's an issue around thought leadership and about the research interests that folk have. Buyers and vendors are looking often at rather different issues. And so there are some issues which vendors might be talking a lot about, but there are other issues which buyers are talking to analysts about, and vendors are not bringing up those topics in the conversation because vendors aren't concerned about some of the issues that buyers are prioritizing. As with every chart that I produce, I have to apologize for the complexity of this chart. It's logarithmic, it's got tiny letters, it's an absolute nightmare. I'm sorry. But there's a serious story being shown there. What we've plotted here is the largest analyst firms, and we've plotted each of them according to how far its clients are on the demand side or on the supply side. So the firms that are below the line are getting fewer customers on the demand side, but getting more customers on the supply side. And the firms that are above the line are getting more customers on the demand side, but fewer customers on the supply side. And of course, a lot of firms are clustered around the line, and being 1 centimetre this side or 1 centimetre that side of the line doesn't make much difference. But what we can see is that there's a substantial spread, especially in the bottom end of the market. There are some firms where there is a profound dislocation in their customer base. Some organizations that vendors are spending a lot of time with, like ISG and Current Analysis, Tech Market View, Frost & Sullivan, but actually not so many people on the demand side are using those firms. And then at the other extent, there are some organizations like CEB, Hackett, Deloitte, KPMG, which are, none of them actually are classic analyst firms, no more than Towers Watson. But these are firms which are being widely used by people on the demand side, and analyst relations professionals need to make sure that these organizations are attended to and are thought about. To drill down, I mean, on this chart, I picked out some particular examples of firms, firstly in the column on the on the left-hand side, where some of these organizations are really getting much more of their work on the demand side than on the supply side. And then on the right-hand side, organizations that are getting much more of their use, much more of their subscriptions on the supply side than they are on the demand side. There's a lot of information in these charts, and I just want to pause quickly to see if either of the other colleagues on the call have got comments or reactions on this, or if there are comments that have been typed into the chat panel in the webinar.
Yeah, but I think, Duncan, particularly on this slide, certainly one story it might be telling is, you know, the user within a company, a vendor firm, for example, could be the market intelligence function. So they might be using the supply side vendors there for particular market intelligence functions, not necessarily analyst relations functions. But I think it is interesting that there is this huge mismatch.
And I wonder if I just kind of go up to the previous slide, where these firms are charted on. I mean, are there any names that surprise you there, or does this? I mean, I wonder, maybe this kind of spread would have been the same any year, maybe with the firms in slightly different positions.
I recognise most of the names there, to be fair. Yeah. I'll tell you one interesting one, and perhaps it comes into a topic a bit later, but right down on the bottom left-hand corner there, you've got a company called Serious Decisions. Mm-hmm. Now, Serious Decisions is a very interesting company in the sense that it's not a classic analyst company at all. It actually serves vendors and helping them with their marketing plans and sales plans and things like that. So it represents one of the, if you like, the new players in the market.
I think one of the complexities that we've seen is that as analyst firms have broadened out their customer base, not just selling to the IT department, but selling to line of business managers, then suddenly the budget that used to go only to very technology-oriented analysts suddenly becomes contested, and you can have organizations that are working in a much more role-based, much more business-oriented way. And then this certainly helps blur the line with firms, I think, like CEB, Deloitte, KPMG, which maybe don't have large independent research processes, but certainly will have a lot of insight to be able to contribute into the market.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
So, firstly, as we've said, some of the larger firms that are on the radar still have quite an imbalance between whether they're getting clients on the demand side or from the supply side. The other issue that the Analyst Value Survey is showing us is that there are new firms on the radar. So in each year's survey, we ask people about the 60 or so biggest firms, and then we also ask about another 50 or so firms on the next tier, and say which of these firms should we consider adding in. And here what you can see here is that the higher up you are in this chart, the more profile you have with firms on the demand side. And the further over to the right you are, the more profile you have with firms that are on the supply side. So that means Blue Hill Research, for example, has got much more profile with the demand side, whereas an organization like Diginomica or Lunendonk has got much more profile with the supply side than with the demand side. What's interesting is that if you look at this, I mean, of course, I've put a trend line on this, and all trend lines have to go from the top and to the right. But if you consider in this chart up here, it's something more like a cluster around the line. Here, it's almost as if you could run a line from Blue Hill Research down to Diginomica, almost as if with the new firms there's more of a direct trade-off. Now, either you have to build business amongst end users, or you build it on the supply side. Certainly, some of the firms that we've asked about are very heavily focused one way or the other. And I think one of the complications is that the supply side firms that are rising, probably organizations that are providing services and products into IT markets, are going to be more likely to be aware of these upstart firms. And then organizations like Signals, Blue Hill Research, IBS, Arab Advisors Group, they are probably going to be much less visible to vendors. So these organizations could be substantially increasing their influence on buyers, but might still be quite invisible as far as the vendor community is concerned. And that means for analyst relations people who are relying on their colleagues rather than any kind of primary data to prioritize analysts, you might be flying blind. I wonder, Stacey, Richard, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think the comment you made about budget, I think, is also quite valid in the sense that budgets are clearly stretched each year, both for vendors and indeed for customers as well. So for these smaller firms to differentiate themselves, I think they do have to actually have a unique selling proposition that actually probably appeals to the buy side or appeals to the demand side. But it is a perennial problem, especially from a vendor's perspective. You know, it's perhaps difficult to include all the firms you might want to include in your AR program because you actually just don't have enough cash to support it. Perhaps because you need to, or you're told to, focus more on the big vendors, you know, the Gartners and the Forresters and the IDCs. But yeah, I take on board. I think the clear thing from this, I think, is budget as well as speciality.
The third slide, the third tortuously complex diagram I have for you. Oh, this is the worst of all, goodness me. But this is a chart that shows the topics about which people have told us that they will be reading research over the next year. And the points that are above the line, these are like analyst relations, cloud platforms, Internet of Things. These are the things which are more important to people on the supply side than they are to folk on the demand side. And the items underneath the line, big data, outsourcing, business intelligence, business process, e-commerce, process management, human capital management, these sorts of things which are south of the line by some way. These are the things which are much more important to the demand side than to the supply side. There's maybe a stronger correlation around this trend line than on the other charts, but certainly there are some strong outliers. And it's interesting to think what the impact of this is in the conversation for analyst relations people, that this research is being used all the way through the process, from early thought leadership, very strategic thinking, all the way down to very nitty-gritty closing the deal. And what we've seen is that, again, some of the topics are much more important to the demand side. Often not things which are super hot, super fashionable, flavor of the day kind of issues. And then on the other side, some of the things which are more significant to the supply side, many of them are issues which are really of relatively little concern to end users. And you might imagine that analysts might find it much easier to get into conversations about the topics on the right-hand side. But actually, analysts are under pressure to produce answers to the questions on the left-hand side. And actually then it might be very hard to get an analyst relations manager or his spokesperson to be very interested in talking about database management or IT administration or law and policy, because these seem like often very mature things where there are not new technology boundaries. But in fact, those are the issues very often that are the most difficult for buyers to resolve, and they're the ones which buyers seem to be much more likely to be reading research about. Stacey, Richard, do you have any thoughts about this, about what this might mean for the way that analyst relations people have to maybe pick different topics for bringing up in conversations with analysts?
I think, your data there actually, it may suggest, from the supply side particularly, that it depends in a company who is actually consuming the analyst's service, in the sense that clearly analyst relations has contracts with analyst firms, but the market intelligence function in a company has relationships with analyst firms. And so that might be a reflection of the person answering the survey is actually saying, well, these are things that are important to my research in the company and how it's going to help me sell to the customer, rather than actually looking at what is the customer interested in and then playing my solution into that particular theme. So certainly I advocate, when you're looking at an analyst relations plan, you're starting off and you're selecting analysts and firms, is you need not only to look at your target market from maybe a technical perspective. Is it information management? Is it analytics or whatever? But it's to look at something that's used a lot in marketing, which is the buyer center model. And there's other people in the decision-making process for products and services. So you need to have a look at what analysts might cover those particular hot buttons of the people in the buyer center, and see how your story from, although it's technology potentially, plays into the business solution that customer might be interested in hearing about. So you really have to take a more holistic approach and look at the whole thing, not just look at the technology, look at how it all comes together. And certainly that information should be contained in your marketing plan.
Thanks. Stacey, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I thought that was said beautifully, and it was very interesting to see this slide. I must admit.
Thank you. The next few slides kind of drill down into this a little bit more, and we've got some particular thoughts about developing a strategy and about where analyst relations wants to go. Richard, I think the first of these points came from you, didn't it? About regularly revisiting targets.
Clearly one should revisit one's plan every year anyway, but certainly specifically looking at analysts, I think I was relating to you, wasn't I, Duncan, that in my days in IBM I worked with a colleague in the software group in Europe, and we made it like if you like, a little competition between ourselves to see how many new analysts we could find within the year in our respective areas. So you've always got to be looking for new analysts and new firms who should be on the radar, and you might have missed before, and are actually relevant to obviously the business that you have.
Mm-hmm. And Stacey, the point about analyst relations being over-comfortable, was that a point that you made?
Yes, I think sometimes it's easy to have data and information and analysis and think that it's truth for much longer than it may be. Things change faster, in today's economy and market than it did in the past. And I think that we need to constantly revisit and not be comfortable. We should always have a theory that we may be wrong and prove ourselves right.
Mm-hmm. And alignment to the marketing plan.
Yeah, I mean, I actually spoke to that a little bit earlier, but certainly from a company's perspective where you're looking to obviously improve your demand generation, clearly it's improve your sales enablement to improve your closure on deals, then aligning the analysts you have with the marketing plan. Have you got analysts that are covering clearly your area, but also covering other related business areas that are relevant to the buyer center model, I think is crucial. And it's always very easy to go, well, we'll just tier the analyst firms, so we get tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 or whatever, and clearly that's a valid approach, but really by doing that sometimes you miss the guys at the bottom, and especially the new guys, because you're always focused on the big guys at the top. So by taking the marketing plan first, then it makes you think a bit more about why you're actually selecting a firm and the analysts who work for that firm.
Mm-hmm. And Stacey, how about alignment to corporate goals?
Well, I believe the first question should be about our actions. Are the actions getting the results that match the corporate goals? We can do a lot of things and we can have a lot of outcomes, but we need to make sure that those are aligned with corporate goals and that everyone is speaking with the same corporate voice. You can have your own message, but that the overall message is one corporate voice.
The other aspect that we've picked up is in terms of developing this kind of risk approach is countering the risks, and a lot of what we've spoken about, it focuses on the need to kind of get more intelligence and more kind of environmental awareness about what's going on in the market outside. Richard, you had some points there, didn't you?
Yeah, indeed. Again, it's a story from when I worked in IBM. So certainly there's value from your survey and the information that's providing. But certainly, for example, when I was at customer events and we'd be holding an analyst event within the customer event, I always took the time out, if I could, to talk with end user customers and talk to them about, okay, do you use analyst services? Which companies do you use? And why, more importantly, do you use that particular company? You know, and you always had you could put a bit more meat to the bones, shall we say. So clearly you knew if you asked anybody that they would be using, if they're a big company, Gartner services. But you then got some insight as to why they may use Gartner and why indeed they may actually use some of these other firms, maybe as a check and balance. So it's always valuable to be talking to people who work at the coalface and understand how they use the particular analyst services and who they indeed, which analysts they think are their favorites.
And in terms of getting more into the nuts and bolts of it, I mean, is there anything else that you would add to that, Stacey?
Yes, I think that if you think of your sales executives as the eyes and ears on the ground every day, they should know their buyers well. They should know where their buyers go for key information, who they trust, even what peers they go to, because many times their peers are going to be very important in their decision making. And so the salesperson should be comfortable asking those types of questions. Who do you trust when you need information and not just data? Where do you go? And using salespeople and what they hear on the ground can be very valuable insight.
Mm-hmm. And I think that actually connects up into some of the points that we have on later on later on a little bit. I think both of you actually have some interesting points about how to develop a plan. Would either of you like to start that?
Again, I think we've covered it, and I've mentioned several times. It's start one key input to the AR plan clearly is the marketing plan. So we've mentioned that, we've mentioned alignment with it, both from a target market perspective, but indeed, in fact, if you think of the marketing plan as well, contains useful information for identifying other influencers other than just analysts. And certainly one of the things that I've done in the past with IBM, with working with analysts, is to actually look at how channel partners can help you in your messaging to analysts. And we used to run Meet the Experts events where we would actually let the channel partners talk to the analysts about what they were doing for IBM, and it was very, very powerful to do that. So the input from the marketing plan is more than just the things I've already mentioned. It is identifying other influencers that can come into the mix, and indeed you can use those other influencers in the influencer mix to help you with analysts. So it's quite powerful, really.
And I think that this trade-off about how to allocate efforts, should you take a long time to turn around a Gartner analyst or mobilize others, that's also the sort of trade-off that really often has to be done with limited resources, and also sometimes with just the hard realities that occasionally it takes other voices in the market to encourage analysts to rethink their concerns about the market, and also this point about using the right people. Stacey, I think in a way you've picked up on this, haven't you, by stressing that you might need to just make sure that personalities are a fit. Obviously, because of your background at SageCircle, I know you've got a lot of insight into like measurements and CRM, tracking things, making sure that you've got also all the intelligence you can gather from the analyst side of the picture. Is there anything you want to say there?
Well, I think one of the key ingredients is measurement, because that helps you with your executive buy-in from every direction, and also it helps you with understanding the difference between just actions. You can do a lot of actions, but it doesn't mean you're getting the results that you need. And again, those results need to map up to corporate goals. So you have to track more than just briefings. You have to track the opinions of those and the outcomes of those. And a tool, like I mentioned, the really innovative tool that I had the great fortune to use. Architect Express is a CRM tool that helps you really track and measure the outcomes of your actions. Very important.
Thank you. And then there's a lot of tactical sense there. I think a lot of this, Stacey, comes from you, doesn't it? The notion that salespeople are your eyes and ears, and the organizations need to certainly have a plan to deal with negative outcomes, but then also people need to be patient and have some sense in the way in which they pick up with disagreements.
Indeed, and I think one of the first things that everyone needs to understand is, don't blame the messenger and tell the messenger why the buyer's wrong. That's certainly not going to help anyone. And so you have to encourage that trust and that you're there to help them, and you all have the same goals and it all maps up. So I think that's very important, and if you're helping people meet their goals, they're going to support you and they're going to give you credit. Sales loves it when somebody helps them win a deal.
Absolutely. We want to wrap up the call with three key ideas that each of us thinks is useful for folk. I'm going to kick off and then move on to Richard and Stacey. My key recommendation is that people should go to analystvaluesurvey.com. If you go to the survey website, up at the top you can actually take part in the survey. And if you take part in the survey, then you'll get an invitation to the results webinar. So that will allow you to get a lot more useful insight. Obviously, we're completely in favor of people buying the survey report and subscribing to get the monthly updates into how influence is changing. But actually, that's a simple thing that you can do in 5 or 6 minutes. That will give you an awful lot more insight into the way in which there might be new firms in your market or firms that aren't quite on your radar that should be part of your analyst relations plan. Richard, your suggestion next.
I guess I'm in danger of doing the classic tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them, in the sense that it's the same thing again, but I do believe it is actually crucially important, to be fair. So, I mean, the key things are clearly look at your marketing plan if you haven't done it before. Look at what the target market is, look at the buyer center model, often describing marketing plans with personas so you can get the exact view of what the type of person in the decision-making process actually is and looks like. Then look at the analysts that you've actually got in your target analyst list. Do they align? Not just analysts, but look at other influencers as well. Look who can help you in channel partners. Look at the competitors from the marketing plan so that you can understand which competitors you might be meeting, and that will help you engage with particular analysts, can help you with sales enablement. So, and also revisit that on a frequent basis, certainly every year, if not perhaps every 6 months, just to see whether you've got the right analysts, new analysts come along, people that you should be including, and certainly have some form of methodology, if you will, to actually rank your analysts. You know, there's going to be some hard things, if you like, quantitative stuff that you can use, but a lot of it actually is qualitative. You know, you've got to understand clearly the analyst's hard skills, you know, but also their soft skills. How good are they at actually talking and presenting? What are their writing skills like? How do they interact with people from what you've seen? You know, all these things I think are crucially important.
Thank you. And Stacey, you get the last word.
Well, I think, again, the last thing anyone in analyst relations would want is a salesperson coming to you with a negative quote, a research report, and you don't know about it. So you're tracking this in some way, and I think it's just what's important, if you're not already, and you may be, but if you're not, to get the information to the salesperson faster, and not just the research. They're not going to read it. They need an executive summary. They need 3 points. 1, why is this important to me? Are my sales? 2, how do I use it and what do I say? And 3, you know, how can I report back and we work together, kind of a thing. So market intelligence can really help, and it's a win-win for both sales and analyst relations and corporate goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacey. I want to leave folk with a couple of suggestions about. Oh, actually, sorry. Now we've got a space for questions, which I should have remembered. So, if there are any questions, you can type them into the chat panel in the web thing. Otherwise, if you've got questions that maybe you don't want to share publicly, or if you've got comments you want to email us, then please feel free to do that. You can email Caleb, who sent you the invitation to the webinar, or myself, and then we'll love to get back to you with any questions that we might have. Just 2 other ideas while I'm waiting to see if there are any questions going to be coming in. Firstly, please join us on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and search in the groups for the Analyst Relations Forum, there's a group of over 400 of the very best analyst relations professionals. You can join that community, see what people are saying there, contribute to the discussion, ask questions. And then, of course, I also recommend the Kia Company newsletter. If you want to find out about our future webinars, if you want to get insight from our team, go to signup.influencerrelations.com and you can get the newsletter sent to you every month. Okay, so I think there are no questions that have come in. So I'd just like to thank Richard and Stacey, and of course you for listening with us through the webinar. Please, if you have any more thoughts, please do let us know. We'll look forward to sharing future webinars with you and future discussions with you in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.